Good morning. Come out this morning to do a video that been meaning to do for a while. It's cool enough this morning. I'm actually going to have me a cup of coffee. I want to address the Colt versus Remington replica BS. It's been going on for a long time, and currently I only actually have one Colt in possession. I own two. This is my 1849 pocket, and then I have apparently what I thought was only 8 revolvers, but I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 Remingtons here, which means I actually own 9 because one of them I didn't break out because of table space here. Feeble old mind. I want to address this specifically, and recently talking with my kid told me that with my lapse of memory and stuff that I needed to start putting down bullet points. So this morning I chose this one. This cartridge is one of my custom loads from back in the day of 35 Wayland. I'm using a 200 grain Hornady interlock, a bullet that's designed specifically towards the 35 Remington crowd to a little faster. This 35 Wayland pushes it out at about 2,950 feet per second, but that's not what we're here for. So I kind of jotted down some bullet points here, and before I get started, I want you to understand this is based on my experience, knowledge, and history, and my opinion. So here it goes. First of all, I am in no way stating that somehow Remington made a superior weapon in the 1860s compared to the Colt. Colt had almost a 30-year jump on perfecting his designs. Let's face it, his first designs were not exactly up to standard that it was come the Civil War. He had to go through, work the product, figure out what was wrong with it, and he improved it as time went on. Remington, on the other hand, just started producing revolvers of a design in a hurry because of the Colt plant burning down. So it stands to reason they weren't up to snuff, but that's historically. I want to address specifically replicas. My personal issues with the Colts over the Remingtons is the manufacturing of the Colts coming out of Italy are poorly manufactured, meaning hammer springs that are too light compared to the original Colts. Arbors that are either too short or barrel housings that are too long. In most cases, retaining screws that are not properly fitted to retain the wedge pin. Cap sucking, and that's not to say that Remingtons cannot have issues come in tight enough to stop the cylinder. However, I'm looking at you right now, and here's what its issue is, and it only takes a few shots for this to happen, so I'm going to show you it straight up. It's that easy that pin pops out of place. So every shot, you have to watch it. And then figure out how to get it back in and out there on the range. Okay for me to do, but not necessarily the right tool for a newcomer to go to. Now, I will admit that this is probably the second worst idea Remington ever had. Because by the time they were coming out with this, bore-through cylinders was already invented. How hard would it have been to have originally just said, okay, we'll pay you a royalty for every revolver we build to build a rim-fired 32. If I'm holding this one, it is completely uncomfortable in my hands. So I am not a big fan of this. It's a Remington. I don't like it. Because when I pick up this, it actually feels like I got almost a full-size handgun with a small package to it. One, I don't believe in light loads in anything. So if I can't trust that the gun's going to hold together to a heavy load, and I can use the term, oh, I don't want to wear out my revolver using heavy loads, then you probably have the wrong choice of revolver. The time to figure out that you're facing a grizzly bear, but you happen to be loaded for snakes, is a bad timing. I go in loaded for a bear, and if I happen to come across the snake, so what? There's no such thing as too heavy of a load. My personal philosophy, that's what I'm sticking to. And if your biggest issue is the fact that you have to lubricate your cylinder to keep it running, let me remind you, a couple of fallacies. I know of a multitude of different guns, including modern day guns, that they recommend no lubrication. I don't buy into that. If I have a moving part, I want some sort of lubrication. In my case, I use a lot of sewing machine oil. Now, when it comes to the Colts or the Remingtons and the cylinder pins, sewing machine oil isn't my choice. However, whatever I'm lubing my bullets with, and others have brought this up too, but whatever I'm lubing my bullets with is also what I put on the cylinder or R pin. I strongly recommend that on even a Colt. And I do know for a fact, I've had many people try to tell me, but Colt said don't use fiber wads or lube. And somehow they interpret that to mean that the bullet on firing lube within the cylinder is what lubricates your arbor. I don't buy that. I've never bought that. They gave grooves in that arbor for a reason, and that holds lubrication. Any moving part, I lubricate, whether that's a Colt or a Remington. In my case, and I do open these up a lot and change them out. We got a cat somewhere. Open these up and lubricate them. So whatever bullet lube I am using, I will put right over top of this cylinder pinhole. And then now, another thing is I've kind of mentioned in the past is when it comes to firearms or antique weapons and history, there's no such things as absolutes. And I've heard many times Remingtons was never ever fast loaded with changing cylinder swaps. And they'll break out, after making such a statement, break out a Remington and a Colt and set it on a table just like what it is here. And they will change out a Remington, which requires one hand, two hands. And then they'll set down a Colt right beside it and redo that, where they have to have three parts and lay it down on a bench as they're doing it and say the speed is almost the same. Well, okay. I don't know about you, but I've never been in this situation, and I can't claim any valor because I never joined a service, but I'm just going off of common sense that if you're in the middle of a battlefield in the Civil War, or you're in the middle of swapping out a cylinder in the middle of even a hunt, that a bench just pops up and lets you do that. For me, especially with a replica, that's 1, 2, 3, and a potential fourth part, the hardest one of them all, a wedge pin falling out into this grass, and now I'm in the middle of searching for stuff that's fell out of my hands because I've had one too many things to juggle. Now, this is not my final point, but I'm going to pull this out, and this is kind of in part for AR American. All European replicas, they're not originals. So at this point, I talked a little bit to AR American that I own this beautiful tool. And when I show you this beautiful tool, the first thing you're going to say is it's a Colt 1911. And the actual fact is no, it isn't. This is a Turkish-made replica. Now, if I bought this and had it shipped to me, if it had a problem with feeding or stove piping out of it while you're shooting, I would be running content that would talk about sending it back to the factory and seeing how their customer service is and fixing this issue. But somehow when we pick up a Colt, our content goes to, oh, let's address this and try to fix it. I suggest stop buying this shit until they get it right. Once they get it right, I will be adding an 1860 Army, and I would add an 1862 Pocket or Sheriff's model or something of that nature, and I would run it out after a third model Dragoon. But until they fix these issues, I don't want nothing to do with them. Because if I can't trust it in a pin, I don't need it. I do own a Walker. It is out. I expect any day now to get notification it's ready to come back. But when it comes back, it's not going to be a standard Colt replica. Now, I have one last issue that I'm going to cover about somehow the pass that the Colt seems to get. The last issue I'm going to cover, and this is to me ridiculous that half of these people that are into this don't quite get this and live with it. And that is, a Colt shoots high and that's just the way it is and you have to put up with it. No, you don't have to put up with it. Anything's fixable, multiple different directions. However, the idea that Colt did this on purpose for a 75-yard shot would stay so region of an enemy. Well, okay, that kind of makes sense until you really nail down what point blank range really is. And point blank range, for those that don't know, isn't what Hollywood teaches you. Hollywood would have you believe that point blank range is execution style, short distance, boom. It is not. Point blank range is this point in which you've got, let's say, a 10-inch kill zone. Use that number a lot for when it comes to big game deer, pronghorn, you name it. Look at a 10-inch kill zone. Point blank range means that you're aiming at the center of that target, that round circle. I know I'm using a square piece of paper, but round circle. You're aiming dead center. Point blank range, or maximum point blank range, means that you aim at that point and the travel of the bullet never reaches the point of being above that point or never reaches the point below that point. Now, a lot of that has to do with velocity, the shape of the bullet, ballistic coefficient, and wind, however you want to look at it. Now, I've done some research over the years, and Lyman's black powder manual does give ballistic coefficients for round ball. Now, the ballistic coefficient of round isn't much to brag about. However, Lyman will tell you a given ballistic coefficient to the round and then turn around and give you a formula to do the math. And to this day, unless I'm missing something up here, which is possible, no matter how I do their math formula, it doesn't match what their ballistic coefficient chart actually says. But bear that in mind. We're going to go with what Lyman says the ballistic coefficient of a 440 and then a 490 round ball is, and then just split the difference. So a 440 round ball they say is a 0.062. For the 490 they say it's a 0.068. So I'm breaking this down to 0.065. And the ballistics for that, I've done two charts for you. And I'm doing it based off of 44 caliber. I've already kind of stated that. And I'm giving it the muzzle velocity, round muzzle velocity of 800 feet per second. At 800 feet per second, if I give it a zero of 50 yards, that means that it comes up this high and it comes back to the point of aim at 50 yards and drops to the point of going out of that point blank range at about 74 yards. I am reaching my highest peak of height at 30 yards of 1.6 inches high at 30 yards. That's not 8, 12, 13 inches high at 7 yards, because at 10 yards it should only be 0.8 inches high. Now, that doesn't get you to the point blank range that I specifically said of 75 yards, but here it is. I upped that to a zero of 60 yards, which means, again, at 60 yards, if I'm aiming dead center, all things surrounding, wind, that atmosphere, that sort of thing, that I will hit dead center at 60 yards. In that case, the max height that I reach is 2.5 inches. Where do I reach that? Again, at 30 yards. Not 8, not 6, certainly not 12 inches high. It is 2.5 inches high. So technically, I could extend my maximum point blank ranging the further I make my zero. But that being said, when I use that 60 yard dead center aim, I now reach a 5-inch drop, and I will try to do pictures of this later so that you see that. But I am now at a 5-inch drop at 80 yards. So 10-inch kill zone, dead center. By the time it reaches 80 yards, it's at the bottom of that kill zone. Don't understand point blank ranging? I suggest you look it up. I find it the simplest. I've been using it for more years than many of you have been alive. When it comes to hunting or combat or whatever the situation is, I find it a whole lot easier to know that I have in the case of a hunting cartridge, which if I take this and use that maximum point blank range, I don't have to compensate for anything under 280 yards, because I know if I aim dead center, I'm never going to be too high for that, and I'm never going to be too low for that shot. When it comes to anything further, I already have the calculations like I laid out here of what it is that I can do out to 350 yards. After that, I want to find a way to get closer. And with that, if you came here wearing your feelings on your shoulder looking to get butt hurt, you may have come to the right place. And I thank you for your time.